The hook. The blood pooled beneath Liu Jianyu's shattered skull, seeping into the cracks of the studio's concrete floor like spilled paint. Chen Wei-ming's knees pressed against the warm liquid as he leaned closer to the dying man's ear, his voice barely a whisper above the mechanical hum of the overhead lights. "Your family will be taken care of," Chen said, watching the light fade from Liu's eyes. "I promise you that." It was a lie, of course, but lies came easier than truth in the shadow of the cameras. The crew stood frozen in a semicircle around them, their faces pale under the harsh studio lighting. Someone had killed the music, the traditional drums that always accompanied the big stunts. Now there was only the sound of Chen's breathing and the distant traffic from Nathan Road filtering through the warehouse windows. Producer Raymond Choi stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete. He surveyed the scene with the cold calculation of a man who had built his empire on controlled violence, his eyes already working the angles. Insurance claims, police reports, media spin. "How long until the ambulance arrives?" Choi asked, not looking at the body. 10 minutes, someone called from the back of the crowd. Choi nodded, then turned to Chen. "What happened to the safety lines?" Chen stood slowly, Liu's blood staining his knees dark red. The question hung in the air like smoke from the prop explosions they detonated earlier. Everyone knew the answer. Chen had ordered the backup cables removed, claiming they would be visible in the wide shot. One take, one perfect fall. That was how legends were made. "Equipment failure," Chen said, meeting Choi's gaze without flinching. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but it was necessary. His daughter Mei Lin's surgery was scheduled for next month. The experimental treatment in Switzerland that might give her legs back after the car accident, it cost more than Chen made in 5 years. This job, this one perfect stunt sequence, was supposed to be his ticket to that future. "Equipment failure," Choi repeated, rolling the words around in his mouth like expensive wine. He glanced down at Liu's body, then back at Chen. "Yes, that's what the report will say." The understanding passed between them without another word. Choi had his own reasons for wanting this incident buried quietly. Drunken Dragon was already over budget, and a safety investigation would shut down production for months. The insurance money would cover Liu's death if it was ruled accidental. If it wasn't... Chen felt the weight of every eye in the room. These were his people, the riggers, the camera operators, the assistant directors who had followed him from one death-defying sequence to the next over the past decade. They trusted him with their lives every day, hanging from helicopters and diving through explosions because Chen Wei-ming never made mistakes. Until tonight. "Anyone who talks to the press gets blacklisted," Choi announced to the room. This was an accident, a tragic accident, nothing more. The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing echoing off the warehouse walls. Someone had covered Liu's face with a jacket, but Chen could still see the outline of his features beneath the fabric. 23 years old, a wife. A son barely old enough to walk. The promise Chen had whispered into Liu's dying ear felt like acid in his chest. As the paramedics burst through the studio doors, Chen stepped back into the shadows, his hands still trembling from adrenaline. The official investigation would take 3 days. The insurance payout would clear in 2 weeks. Production on Drunken Dragon would resume with a new stuntman and reinforced safety protocols. And Chen would wire the first installment for Mei Lin's treatment the following month, just as planned. But as he watched them load Liu Jianyu's body onto the stretcher, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would come back to haunt him. In Hong Kong's tight-knit film industry, secrets had a way of surfacing at the worst possible times, and debts, especially blood debts, always demanded payment eventually. The boy, Liu's son, would grow up without a father. He would ask questions about that night. He would want answers that Chen could never give. 35 years later, those answers would finally come. But tonight, as the ambulance disappeared into the neon-soaked streets of Kowloon and the crew began the grim task of cleaning blood from the concrete, Chen Wei-ming allowed himself to believe that some secrets could stay buried forever. The studio lights flickered overhead, casting dancing shadows across the empty set where Liu Jianyu had taken his final fall. In the distance, thunder rolled across Victoria Harbor, and Chen pulled his jacket tighter against the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Some mistakes, he was beginning to understand, were too big to hide, but he would try anyway. Introduction. The rain began as Chen Wei-ming drove through the empty streets toward home, fat droplets exploding against his windshield like the blood that still stained his knees. Each sweep of the wipers seemed to echo the rhythm of his daughter's breathing machine, the mechanical wheeze that had filled their apartment for the past 18 months since the accident. Thunder cracked overhead as he pulled into the narrow alley behind their building in Sham Shui Po. The old tenement rose 12 stories into the Hong Kong night, its windows glowing like amber squares against the darkness. Most were dark now. It was past 3 in the morning, but Chen could see the soft blue light from the 7th floor where Mei Lin waited for him, probably still awake despite her pain medication. She always waited up when he worked late shoots. The elevator wheezed and groaned as it carried him upward, its cables singing the same song they had for 30 years. Chen pressed his forehead against the cool metal wall and closed his eyes, but all he could see was Liu Jianyu's face in those final seconds, surprise giving way to understanding, then acceptance. The young man had known he was going to die, had known that Chen's negligence had killed him. Your family will be taken care of. The lie burned in Chen's chest like swallowed glass. The apartment door opened before he could find his keys. Mei Lin sat in her wheelchair, silhouetted against the warm light from their small living room. At 19, she had inherited her mother's delicate features and Chen's stubborn jaw, though both were sharper now from months of surgery and recovery. Her legs, once strong enough to carry her through ballet competitions across the territory, lay motionless beneath a soft blanket. "Ba," she said softly, using the Cantonese word for father that always made his heart clench. "How did the shoot go?" Chen forced a smile and stepped inside, careful to keep his blood-stained knees turned away from her. "Long night. You should be sleeping. The pain's bad again." She wheeled backward to give him space, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely wide enough for one person, a living room dominated by medical equipment. But Mei Lin had learned to navigate every inch with fluid grace. Dr. Huang called, about the treatment in Switzerland. Chen's stomach dropped. What did he say? "They want the first payment within 2 weeks, or they'll give the spot to someone else." Her voice was steady, but Chen caught the tremor beneath it. "Ba, maybe we should consider the local options. Dr. Huang says the rehabilitation program at Queen Mary Hospital—" "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. Chen knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her small hands in his. They were cold, always cold, since the accident had damaged her circulation. "You're going to walk again, Mei Lin. I promised you that." She studied his face with eyes too old for 19. "What aren't you telling me?" Chen had spent 40 years perfecting dangerous illusions, making the impossible look effortless for the cameras. But he had never been able to lie to his daughter, not completely. "There was an accident tonight," he said carefully. "On set. A stuntman was hurt. Badly." The weight of Liu Jianyu's death pressed against Chen's ribs like broken glass. "Yes, badly." Mei Lin's fingers tightened around his. "Was it your fault?" The question hung between them in the blue glow of the medical monitors. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against their windows with increasing urgency. Chen could smell the jasmine tea Mei Lin had been drinking, mixed with the antiseptic scent of her medication and the faint ozone tang of the approaching storm. "These things happen in our business," he said finally. "Risk is part of what we do." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. That was Mei Lin. She had learned to read the boundaries of his silence, to know when pushing would only drive him further away. "The money will come," Chen said, standing slowly. His knees ached where Liu's blood had soaked through the fabric. 2 weeks. I'll have it in 2 weeks. Bah! You're going to walk again." He leaned down and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, something floral and innocent that reminded him of her mother. "I promise you that." As he helped her back to bed, checking the settings on her pain medication dispenser and adjusting the height of her wheelchair for the morning, Chen tried not to think about the other promise he'd made tonight. The one whispered into a dying man's ear as his blood pooled on cold concrete. Later, lying in his own bed and listening to the rain pound against his window, Chen stared at the ceiling and wondered how long secrets could stay buried in a city built on rumors and old debts. Somewhere out there, Liu Jianyu's son was sleeping, unaware that his father would never come home. In a few hours, the boy would wake up and ask questions that Chen could never answer. But tonight, in the darkness of his small apartment with his daughter breathing softly in the next room, Chen allowed himself to believe that some promises were worth any price, even if that price was another man's life. Inciting incident. Sleep never came. Chen lay in his narrow bed, watching the digital clock tick through the hours until dawn painted Hong Kong's skyline in shades of amber and gray. By 6 o'clock, the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under the early morning sun, but the blood on his knees had dried into dark stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He was making coffee when the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the apartment door, delivered with the kind of authority that made Chen's hands freeze around the ceramic mug. Mei Lin was still sleeping. He could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing from the next room, undisturbed by the sound. The medication kept her under until at least 9. Chen set down the coffee and moved to the door, his bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. Through the peephole, he saw a young man in an expensive suit, maybe 30 years old, with sharp features and patient eyes. A stranger. But something about the way he stood, perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, made Chen's chest tighten with recognition. He had seen that stance before. In the old photographs Liu Jianyu used to carry in his wallet, Chen's hand hesitated on the lock. This was impossible. The boy, Liu's son, would be barely walking now, not standing in a hallway wearing $1,000 tailoring and looking at Chen's door like he owned it. But the math was wrong. All wrong. Chen opened the door. "Mr. Chen Wei-ming," the young man said, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone educated overseas. "My name is Daniel Liu. I believe you knew my father." The words hit Chen like a physical blow. He gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white against the chipped paint, as his mind raced through calculations that didn't make sense. Liu Jianyu had been 23 when he died. His son had been barely 2 years old. That was 35 years ago. The boy should be 37 now, not... "You're confused," Daniel Liu said, reading Chen's expression with unsettling accuracy. "You're thinking about my younger brother, the one from my father's second marriage, the baby he left behind." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I was from his first marriage. I was 15 when he died." Chen felt the ground shift beneath his feet. 15, old enough to understand, old enough to remember, old enough to spend 35 years planning. "May I come in?" Daniel asked, though he was already stepping forward. "We have so much to discuss." Chen's apartment had never felt smaller. Daniel Liu moved through the space with careful precision, his eyes cataloging every detail: the medical equipment, the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms, the framed photographs on the wall that showed Mei Lin before her accident, dancing, laughing, walking. "She's beautiful," Daniel said, pausing before a picture of Mei Lin in her ballet costume, en pointe against a backdrop of stage lights. "Your daughter. Mei Lin, isn't it?" The casual way he spoke her name made Chen's blood freeze. "What do you want?" "Justice." Daniel turned away from the photographs, his hands still clasped behind his back in that familiar pose. "But not the kind you're thinking. I'm not here for revenge, Mr. Chen. I'm here with an offer." He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, and withdrew a thick envelope. The paper was expensive, cream-colored, with Chen's name written across the front in elegant calligraphy. "A film," Daniel said, setting the envelope on their small dining table. "A major production, international financing, the kind of budget that would let you choreograph sequences the way you've always dreamed." Chen didn't move toward the envelope. "Who are you?" "I told you. Daniel Liu." He smiled again, and this time Chen caught a glimpse of his father in the curve of his mouth. "Though you might know me better by my professional name, Danny Lau. I'm sure you've heard of Lau Entertainment." Chen had heard of it. Everyone in the industry had. Lau Entertainment had burst onto the Hong Kong film scene 5 years ago, backing big-budget productions and luring top talent with offers that established studios couldn't match. Their films played in theaters from Los Angeles to Shanghai. and their founder was rumored to be one of the wealthiest men in the territory. "You're Liu Jianyu's son," Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm also the man who's going to make your daughter walk again." Daniel gestured toward the envelope. "Read it. The offer. The insurance policy that comes with it. The medical coverage for your family." Chen's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope. The paper felt warm beneath his fingers, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside was a contract, dozens of pages of legal text and financial figures that made his head spin, but the numbers were clear enough. More money than he had ever imagined. Enough for Mei Lin's treatment 10 times over. "Why?" Chen asked. Daniel Lu moved to the window, looking out at the city where his father had died 35 years ago. In the morning light, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. But when he turned back to Chen, his eyes held the weight of decades. "Because some debts can only be paid with blood," he said quietly. "And some promises are worth keeping, even when the man who made them was a liar." The envelope slipped from Chen's fingers, contracts scattering across the linoleum floor like fallen leaves. In the next room, Mei Lin stirred in her sleep, and Chen realized that everything he thought he understood about that night, about Liu Jianyu's death, about the boy left behind, had been built on a lie. His lie, and now the truth had come home. The contracts lay scattered across the floor like accusations, their pristine pages now creased and bent. Chen stared at them, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. The numbers swam before his eyes, figures that could change everything, wrapped in Daniel Lu's patient smile. "I need time to think," Chen said, his voice hoarse. "Of course." Daniel straightened his cuffs, the gesture casual but somehow threatening. "But not too much time. The financing window closes next week." After Daniel left, Chen tried to convince himself it was all an elaborate hallucination brought on by guilt and exhaustion. He gathered the contracts with shaking hands, shoving them into a kitchen drawer beneath old utility bills and takeout menus. Out of sight, almost forgotten, but the numbers haunted him. The phone rang at noon. Chen almost didn't answer, but Mei Lin's voice from her bedroom made the decision for him. "Ba? Is that Dr. Huang?" It wasn't. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, gruff, speaking rapid Cantonese with a mainland accent. "Mr. Chen, this is Wang from the insurance company. About the Liu Jianyu claim from 1987. Chen's grip tightened on the receiver. "That was settled years ago." "Yes, well, some new information has come to light. Questions about the safety protocols. We'll need to review the case file." The line went dead before Chen could respond. He stood frozen in his kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like an angry wasp. 35 years. The case had been closed for 35 years. That afternoon, Chen drove to the studio where he'd worked most of his career. Golden Harvest Productions occupied a sprawling complex in Suanwan, its sound stages and office buildings a testament to Hong Kong cinema's golden age. But the parking lot was half empty now, and many of the office windows were dark. He found his old friend, Tommy Choi, in the archives, surrounded by boxes of film canisters and yellowing paperwork. Choi had been a producer back in the 80s, before the mainland money changed everything. Now he managed the company's old assets and tried to stay invisible. "Wei Ming." Choi looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "I heard you were retired, taking a consultation job. Needed to check some old records." Choi's expression shifted, becoming careful. "What kind of records?" "The Liu Jian to you incident. 1987. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Choi's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Chen. "Why would you want to dig up that old business?" "Insurance questions. Routine follow-up. After 35 years? Choi laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Nothing about that case was routine, Wei Ming, you know that." Chen watched his old friend's face, noting the tension around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed against the desk. "What aren't you telling me?" "What aren't you telling me?" Choi countered. "You show up here asking about a dead stuntman, and you expect me to just hand over files? That case nearly destroyed this studio because of the cover-up, because of what we all agreed to do." Choi stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the main soundstage. We protected each other. We protected the industry. And now you want to open old wounds? Someone already opened them. The words slipped out before Chen could stop them. Choi turned slowly. What do you mean? Chen realized he'd said too much. But Choi's fear was palpable now, filling the small office like smoke. The Liu boy, Chen said carefully. The older son. He's in Hong Kong. The color drained from Choi's face. That's impossible. He moved to Canada after the funeral, changed his name. We made sure. He stopped abruptly, clamping his mouth shut. Made sure of what? Nothing. Forget I said anything. Choi moved back to his desk, his movements jerky and nervous. The files you want were destroyed years ago. Flood damage. Nothing left. But Chen had worked with Choi long enough to read the lies in his body language. Who else knows he's back? I told you. Who else, Tommy? Choi's shoulders sagged. Half the old crew has been contacted. Insurance investigators asking questions. Accountants digging through old payroll records. He looked up at Chen with haunted eyes. Someone's been very thorough, Wei Ming, very patient. That evening, Chen sat at his kitchen table staring at the drawer where he'd hidden Daniel Liu's contract. Mei Lin was watching television in the living room, laughing at some comedy show, her medication keeping the pain at bay for a few precious hours. The apartment felt smaller with each passing minute. The walls seemed to press inward, carrying the weight of 35 years of silence. Chen pulled out the contracts, reading through them again, searching for hidden clauses or impossible demands. But the offer was exactly what Daniel had claimed. Generous beyond reason. Almost too good to be true. Which meant it was. Chen's hands trembled as he reached for his phone to call Dr. Huang about delaying Mei Lin's treatment. But the line was dead, just static, and the distant echo of voices speaking in languages he couldn't understand. In the living room, Mei Lin laughed again, the sound bright and innocent. And Chen realized that his attempts to stay safe had already failed. Chen stared at the dead phone, the static hissing like accusations through the earpiece. He pressed the disconnect button and tried again, but the dial tone was gone, replaced by that strange electronic whisper that seemed to carry voices from somewhere far away. His hands shook as he set the receiver back in its cradle. In the living room, Mei Lin's laughter had stopped. The television droned on, but something had shifted in the apartment's atmosphere, a tension that made the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. Bah? Mei Lin's voice carried a note of concern. Is everything all right? Fine, Chen called back, but his voice cracked on the word. He pulled Daniel Liu's contract from the drawer again, spreading the pages across the kitchen table like tarot cards predicting a bitter future. The financial terms were impossibly generous, enough money to pay for Mei Lin's treatment and set them up for life. But buried in the legal language, he began to notice things he'd missed before. Filming locations that matched places where Chen had worked in 1987. Stunt sequences that mirrored the exact setup that had killed Liu Jianyu. Even the insurance provisions seemed designed to echo the policies that had been voided 35 years ago. This wasn't just a film contract. It was a reconstruction. Chen's phone buzzed, not the landline, but his mobile. A text message from an unknown number. The truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? Even when we bury it deep. His blood turned to ice. He deleted the message and immediately dialed Tommy Choi's number, but that line was dead too. Then Dr. Huang's office. Nothing. The mobile network seemed to be working. He could see full signal bars, but every number connected to his past had been severed. Mei Lin wheeled into the kitchen, her face pale with worry. Bah, you're scaring me. What's happening? Chen looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. The weight loss was more pronounced than he'd allowed himself to acknowledge. Her skin had a translucent quality that spoke of pain held too long in check. The Swiss treatment wasn't just hope anymore. It was necessity. Do you remember your mother's brother? Chen asked suddenly. Uncle Ming in Vancouver? Of course. Why? I think it might be time for a visit. A long visit. Mei Lin's eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me? And don't say it's nothing. I can see it in your face, the same expression you had after Mother died, when you thought I was too young to understand. Chen felt something crack inside his chest. His daughter had inherited more than her mother's delicate features. She had the same ability to see through his carefully constructed facades, to find the truth he tried so desperately to hide. "There was an accident," he said slowly. "A long time ago, before you were born, a man died because of decisions I made. The stuntman you mentioned yesterday? Yes, but not yesterday. 35 years ago." The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "His son has come back." Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment, processing this. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but distant. "Is that why you've never talked about the old days? Why you never keep in touch with anyone from before?" Chen nodded, unable to trust his voice. "And now this son wants, what, money? An apology? I don't know." Chen looked down at the contract spread before him. "He's offered me more work than I've had in years, enough money to pay for your treatment. But everything about it feels wrong. Because guilt makes everything feel like a trap," Mei Lin said quietly. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Bah, what exactly happened that night?" Chen closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back on that rain-slicked set in 1987. Liu Jianyu, young and eager, asking one more time if the rigging was safe. Chen's impatient wave, his focus on the schedule rather than the setup. The sound of snapping cables and Liu's scream cut short by the impact with concrete 3 stories below. And then the afterward, the studio executives, the lawyers, the careful reconstruction of events that painted Liu's death as an unavoidable accident rather than the result of Chen's corner-cutting and negligence. "I was responsible," Chen whispered. "And instead of accepting that responsibility, I let them cover it up. I let them pay off his family and destroy the evidence because I was afraid. Afraid of prison, afraid of losing my career, afraid of not being able to take care of you when your mother got sick." Mei Lin squeezed his hand tighter. How old was his son? 15. Old enough to know his father was murdered by my negligence. Old enough to remember every lie we told at the funeral. The apartment fell silent, except for the hum of medical equipment and the distant sound of Hong Kong traffic. Chen felt the weight of 35 years pressing down on him. Heavier than the rain, heavier than his daughter's medical bills, heavier than his fear of what Daniel Liu might do next. Outside their window, the city lights began to flicker on, painting the walls in shifting patterns of neon and shadow. Somewhere out there, Daniel Liu was waiting for an answer to his offer, and Chen finally understood that no matter what he chose, his daughter was already in danger. The weight of 35 years of silence pressed against Chen's chest as he watched his daughter absorb the truth about Liu Jianyu's death. But Mei Lin's next words shattered something deeper than his guilt. "Bah," she said quietly, her fingers still gripping his hand. "There's something I need to tell you, too." The tone in her voice, careful, measured, made Chen look up sharply. In the shifting neon light from the window, his daughter's face held an expression he'd never seen before. Not pain, not worry, but something that looked almost like relief. "The accident," Mei Lin continued. "My accident. The one that put me in this chair. Mei Lin, you don't need to." I wasn't alone that night. The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for years. There was someone with me, someone who knew about Father Liu, about what happened on that set in 1987. Chen felt the world tilt sideways. "What are you talking about?" Mei Lin released his hand and wheeled backwards slightly, creating distance between them. "His name was David Liu. He said he was researching old film industry accidents for a documentary. We'd been meeting for weeks before," she gestured at her legs, "before this happened." The name hit Chen like a physical blow. David Liu, Daniel Liu. The same careful pronunciation, the same overseas education smoothing the edges of Cantonese vowels. "He told you about the accident?" "Not directly. He was subtle about it. Asked questions about your career, about why you stopped working on big productions after 1987. He seemed to know things about our family that weren't public record." Chen's mind raced through the implications. "Mei Lin, when exactly did you meet this David?" 3 years ago, just before I started having problems with my balance." She looked down at her hands, which had begun to tremble. "Bah, I don't think what happened to me was an accident." The apartment fell deadly quiet. Outside, Hong Kong's night traffic hummed its usual symphony, but inside their small space, Chen could hear only the ragged sound of his own breathing. "The car that hit me," Maylene continued, her voice growing stronger. "The driver was never found, but David was there afterward, at the hospital. He brought flowers and said he'd heard about it from mutual friends." She looked up at Chen with eyes that held 3 years of suppressed suspicion. "But we didn't have any mutual friends, B.A. We never did." Chen felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not just guilt now, but a cold, creeping understanding that reframed every interaction, every kindness, every moment of the last 3 years. "You think he caused your accident? I think he wanted to make sure you had something to lose, something that would make you vulnerable when he finally came for you. The medical bills, the experimental treatments, the mounting desperation that had made Daniel Liu's offer seem like salvation rather than manipulation." Chen realized he'd been looking at everything backward. This wasn't about revenge for Liu Jianyu's death. This was about control. 3 years, Chen whispered. "He's been planning this for 3 years. Longer than that." Maylin reached into the bag attached to her wheelchair and pulled out a manila envelope Chen had never seen before. "I hired a private investigator 6 months ago. Someone who specializes in corporate research." She handed him the envelope, and Chen's hands shook as he opened it. Inside were photographs, financial records, and newspaper clippings that painted a picture of methodical, patient destruction. Daniel Liu, or David, or whatever his real name was, hadn't just built Lau Entertainment into a powerhouse. He'd systematically acquired the debts and contracts of everyone connected to his father's death. Tommy Choi's production company, the insurance firm that had handled the original settlement, even the building where Chen's apartment was located. "He owns us," Chen breathed. "He owns all of us." "Not yet." Maylin's voice carried a steel that reminded Chen suddenly of her mother. "But he's been closing the circle for years. Every person who was on that set, every executive who signed off on the cover-up, every family member who might be leverage." Chen found himself laughing, a bitter, hollow sound that held no humor. "And I thought I was protecting you by staying silent." "You were protecting me," Maylin said firmly, "but from the wrong threat." The revelation hung between them like a bridge spanning decades of misunderstanding. Chen had spent 35 years carrying the weight of Liu Jianyu's death, believing that his silence was the price of his daughter's safety. But his silence had never been protection. It had been the very thing that made them vulnerable. "What do we do now?" Chen asked. Maylin smiled, and for the first time in 3 years it wasn't shadowed by pain or medication. "Now we stop letting him write the story, and we start writing our own." Outside their window, the city lights continued their eternal dance. But inside the apartment, something had shifted. The truth, finally spoken, had changed the rules of a game Chen was only now beginning to understand. The envelope's contents scattered across the kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene that had taken 35 years to process. Chen stared at the photographs, surveillance shots of himself leaving medical appointments, meeting with doctors, signing papers for Maylin's treatments. Every moment of desperation documented and filed away like ammunition. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Known for certain?" 6 months. Maylin's fingers traced the edge of a bank statement showing the maze of shell companies that now controlled their lives. "Suspected?" "Since the day I woke up in the hospital and found David Liu sitting beside my bed with tears in his eyes." Chen felt something volcanic building in his chest. Not just anger, but a rage that had been buried under guilt for so long he'd forgotten it existed. "He crippled you to get to me. He broke me to break you." The matter-of-fact way she said it made the words even more devastating. "Every sleepless night you spent researching treatments, every humiliating conversation with insurance companies, every time you looked at me and blamed yourself, that was all part of his design." The kitchen's fluorescent light flickered, casting intermittent shadows across the evidence spread before them. Chen picked up a photograph of Daniel Liu shaking hands with a hospital administrator, the same hospital where Maylin received her treatments. Even Dr. Huang. Especially Dr. Huang. The Swiss clinic, the experimental procedures, they're real, but they're also bait. Every hope he gave us was measured and calculated. Mei Lin's voice remained steady, but Chen could see the cost of this revelation in the tight lines around her eyes. He's been feeding us just enough possibility to keep us hungry. Chen stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the narrow alley behind their building. 3 stories down, the same distance Lu Jianyu had fallen. He wondered if that detail was intentional too, if their apartment had been chosen specifically for its symbolic resonance. "The contract," he said suddenly. "I haven't signed it yet." "Doesn't matter if you sign it or not. The film is already in production. The insurance policies are already active. Everyone who was on that set in 1987 has already been cast in their roles." Mei Lin's wheelchair made barely a whisper as she moved closer to him. "Bah, this was never about giving you a choice. It was about making you think you had one." Chen pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching the late-night vendors set up their stalls in the alley below. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 35-year-old sins were finally coming home to collect their interest. What does he want? Really? What he's always wanted. For you to experience what his father experienced. The terror of falling without anyone catching you. The simplicity of it was almost elegant. No dramatic confrontation, no movie-style revenge plot. Just the slow, methodical destruction of everything Chen had built since that night in 1987. His career, his reputation, his daughter's health, all of it carefully dismantled piece by piece. And the others? Tommy Choi, the insurance investigators? All dancing to the same tune. Some of them don't even know they're being manipulated. Mei Lin pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts, but Tommy figured it out 2 days ago. "That's why your phones have been cutting out. Lu's been isolating us, making sure we can't coordinate a defense." Chen turned from the window, studying his daughter's face in the artificial light. 3 years of pain had carved new lines around her eyes, but underneath them he could see the sharp intelligence that had always reminded him of her mother. The same ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. "You have a plan," he said. "We have a plan." She smiled, and for a moment the years fell away, and she was 8 years old again, plotting elaborate pranks on their uptight neighbors. "But first, there's something else you need to know. About the night my mother died." Chen's blood went cold. "Mei Lin?" "Lu was there too, at the hospital. I saw him talking to the duty nurse, but I was too young to understand what it meant." Her voice remained calm, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. "He's been watching us for 20 years, Ba. Long before David appeared in my life. This isn't just about his father's death. It's about destroying everything you've ever loved." The revelation hit Chen like a physical blow. 20 years of surveillance, 20 years of patient observation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every family dinner, every birthday celebration, every quiet moment of happiness had been watched and catalogued by someone who saw them only as instruments of his revenge. But as Chen looked at his daughter, really looked at the steel in her eyes and the determination in her voice, he realized that Lu had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that guilt would make them weak. Instead, it was about to make them dangerous. Chen felt the last 30 to 5 years crystallize into a single moment of absolute clarity. The guilt that had shaped every decision, every sleepless night, every careful lie. It all fell away like old skin, leaving something harder underneath. "Tell me about the plan," he said. Mei Lin's smile held the same fierce intelligence her mother had possessed, but tempered by 3 years of calculated pain. "Lu thinks he's been directing this story, but he's made one fundamental error. He's so focused on recreating the past that he's forgotten the most important rule of stunt work, which is, the person who falls isn't always the person who dies." She wheeled to the kitchen counter and pulled out a laptop Chen had never seen before. Sleek, expensive, clearly not purchased on their meager budget. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, bringing up screens of financial data, building schematics, and what appeared to be production schedules for Lao Entertainment. "For 6 months, I've been documenting everything, every shell company, every forged document, every bribed official. But more importantly, I've been tracking his patterns." The screen filled with a timeline that stretched back 20 years, marked with red dots that Chen gradually recognized as moments from their lives, His wife's diagnosis, Mei Lin's birth, career setbacks he'd attributed to bad luck. All of it, Chen breathed. Every tragedy, every struggle, every push toward the edge. But Lu's obsession with control is also his weakness. He needs to be there for the finale. He needs to see your face when you realize everything you've lost. Mei Lin's voice carried a cold satisfaction that reminded Chen uncomfortably of the man who had orchestrated their suffering. Tomorrow night's filming isn't just about completing his revenge, it's about his catharsis. Chen studied the production schedule on the screen. The final scene was set for midnight, on the same sound stage where Liu Jianyu had died. Even the weather forecast showed rain, a detail that couldn't possibly be coincidence. He's recreating everything exactly, down to the last detail, including the rigging that will fail. Mei Lin pulled up building schematics that showed modifications made to the soundstage over the past month. But what he doesn't know is that Tommy Choi reached out to me 3 days ago. Liu may own his company, but he doesn't own his conscience. The revelation shifted something fundamental in Chen's understanding. Tommy wasn't just another victim. He was a potential ally who had recognized the same patterns they had. What does Tommy know? Everything we know, plus one crucial detail. The prop gun with real bullets? That was never meant for you. Mei Lin's fingers moved across the keyboard, bringing up the shooting schedule for tomorrow's scene. It was meant for whoever tries to save you. The words hit Chen like a physical blow. Lu's revenge wasn't just about making him suffer. It was about making him watch his daughter die trying to protect him. The ultimate recreation of the original tragedy, with the roles perfectly reversed. He expects you to come to the set, Chen said, understanding flooding through him. He's counting on it, just like he counted on your guilt, your desperation, your love for me. But for 20 years, he's been watching us from a distance. He knows our weaknesses, but he's never seen our strengths. Mei Lin closed the laptop and met Chen's eyes directly. In that moment, he saw not his broken daughter, but his wife's fierce protector spirit, refined by years of pain into something unbreakable. What he doesn't know, she continued, is that I've been learning. Physical therapy taught me patience, pain management taught me precision, and 3 years of watching him destroy us piece by piece taught me how to destroy him. Chen felt something shift in his chest, not the crushing weight of guilt, but the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before a dangerous stunt. For the first time in 35 years, he wasn't running from the consequences of that night in 1987. He was running toward them. The rigging that's supposed to fail, he said slowly. We make sure it's his rigging, not mine. And the bullets that are supposed to kill? Mei Lin's smile was sharp as broken glass. We make sure they find their intended target. Outside their window, Hong Kong's neon lights painted shifting patterns across the walls. But for the first time in years, Chen wasn't seeing the city as a cage. He was seeing it as a stage, and tomorrow night's performance would finally give Liu Jianyu's death the ending it deserved. Not the one where guilt triumphed over justice. The one where the dead could finally rest. He's been directing this story for 20 years, Chen said quietly. Tomorrow night, we take back the camera. Mei Lin nodded, her hand finding his across the table. And we show him what real revenge looks like. The truth had finally been confronted. Now it was time to set it free.